Oh my God, you smell that, Sabrina? Dylan didn't even look up from his phone, just curled his nose toward the door like something had crawled in off the street and hadn't been invited. Sabrina leaned over the counter, a slow grin spreading across her face. Sir, her voice dropped to the kind of flat that's designed to sting. This isn't a soup kitchen. You got actual money, or are you just here for the air conditioning? The man in the gray hoodie said nothing. He walked forward quietly, hands loose at his sides. No flinch, no hurry. He glanced up at the menu above the counter. When he spoke, his voice was low and even, the kind of calm that doesn't need volume to carry weight. Southern breakfast platter, scrambled eggs, extra toast, please. $14.99. Sabrina tilted her head. You sure? He placed a crisp 20 on the counter. No expression, no reaction, just stillness. These two had absolutely no idea who they had just humiliated, and what they were about to do behind that counter would cost them everything. That morning started the way most Saturdays did for Marcus Allen. 5:30 a.m. The alarm didn't go off because he had never stopped being a man who woke up before the world asked him to. His home in Buckhead, Atlanta was large, but quietly so. No marble columns, no gold fixtures, no art chosen to impress. Just clean lines, warm wood floors, and a hallway lined with framed photographs that told the story of a life built from scratch. One photo, a 26-year-old Marcus standing in front of a small diner with a hand-painted sign. Golden Griddle Grand Opening, 2022. Another, him shaking hands with the governor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. A third, a framed Forbes magazine cover. Self-made, how a dishwasher built a $90 million diner empire. He walked past all three without looking. He had seen them 1,000 times. They were never meant to remind him of how far he had come. They were meant to remind him of why he started. In the bathroom mirror, he studied his reflection for a long moment. Then he reached for the gray hoodie hanging on the back of the door. Faded jeans, white sneakers with a crease down the middle, no watch, no ring, no cologne. He opened the garage. A black Mercedes SUV sat next to a 2014 Honda Civic with a small dent on the rear bumper. He grabbed the Civic keys. This was something Marcus did twice a year. No announcement, no schedule, no warning to staff, no memo to regional managers. He called it the real menu. He would walk into one of his own 38 Golden Griddle locations dressed like a man who had nothing. And he would see, with his own eyes, exactly how his employees treated people who looked like they had nothing. Before backing out of the garage, he clipped a tiny body camera inside the hoodie pocket. The lens was no bigger than a pencil eraser. Rachel Hammond, his chief operations officer, was already at the Atlanta corporate office watching the live feed on her laptop. She had a full legal team on standby. Marcus pulled out of the driveway. The morning sun hadn't fully risen. The streets of Buckhead were still and empty, the city holding its breath before the day began. 40 minutes later, he parked the Civic in the lot of the Golden Griddle in Decatur, Georgia, a working-class suburb east of Atlanta, diverse, hardworking, the kind of neighborhood where a good diner isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. Saturday morning, 9:15 a.m. The breakfast rush was winding down, but the lot was still half full. He sat in the car for a moment. Through the front window, he could see the interior he had designed himself nearly 2 decades ago. Checkered black and white floors, red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner spinning Motown on a loop. He had built that space to feel like his grandmother's kitchen. Warm, safe, the kind of place where anybody, regardless of what they were wearing or where they came from, could walk through the door and feel like they were welcome. He stepped out of the car. The air smelled like warm syrup and coffee grounds drifting from the kitchen vent. A bell above the front door chimed softly when he pushed it open. Inside, the diner was alive. A black family of 4 sat near the window, the mother adjusting a napkin on her daughter's lap. 2 college students shared a stack of pancakes near the jukebox. A Latino couple with a toddler waited quietly near the register. Behind the counter stood 2 cashiers. Dylan Pierce. White, late 20s. He was leaning against the back. Wall, one earbud in, scrolling his phone, chewing gum with his mouth open. His uniform shirt was untucked. Sabrina Cole. White, early 30s. She was standing at the second register, whispering something close to Dylan's ear. Both of them laughed. The Latino couple stood at the counter waiting. Neither cashier acknowledged them. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. The husband cleared his throat politely. Sabrina glanced up. She exhaled slowly through her nose, a deliberate breath, the kind designed to make another person feel like a burden, and said flatly, without a smile, without eye contact, "What do you want?" Then, not 15 seconds later, a young white couple walked through the front door. Dylan immediately straightened up. He pulled out his earbud, turned, and smiled wide, the kind of smile that takes effort, the kind reserved for people you've decided are worth it. "Hey, welcome to Golden Griddle. What are y'all in the mood for this morning?" Same counter, same minute, completely different service. Through the kitchen pass-through window, a woman named Patricia Owens watched it all. She was the morning cook, black, mid-50s. She had worked at this location for 6 years. Her hands moved steadily over the grill, flipping eggs, pressing bacon, but her jaw was tight. She had seen this exact scene play out more times than she could count. She had filed 2 formal complaints about Dylan and Sabrina to the regional manager. Both had disappeared. The regional manager was James Thornton, Dylan's uncle. Marcus stood just inside the door, observing everything. His hands hung loose at his sides. His face showed nothing. Then he walked to the counter, and that's when Dylan opened his mouth. Sabrina leaned over to watch, arms folded, one eyebrow arched. Dylan glanced at Marcus's change, then back at him with a slow, deliberate look. "Gotta be careful these days," he said, just loud enough for the nearest booth to hear. "Just never know with some people." Marcus said nothing. His hands stayed at his sides. He watched. Dylan slapped the bill on the counter and punched the order into the register. His fingers moved too quickly. Marcus caught the screen just before it flipped to the total, $14.99 for the platter. Tax. And then a third line that had absolutely no business being there. Special preparation fee, $3.50. Total $18.49. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "What's the special preparation fee?" Dylan didn't look up. "Standard charge. Everybody pays for it." "I've eaten at other Golden Griddle locations. I've never seen that charge on any receipt." Dylan planted both palms flat on the counter and leaned in. His voice dropped not to a whisper, but to that particular low that dares you to say one more word. "Maybe those locations run things their way. Here, that's what it costs. Do you want the food or not?" A woman in the booth behind Marcus glanced over. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. She looked away quickly, pretending she hadn't heard. Marcus held Dylan's gaze for 2 full seconds. Then he nodded once. "I'll take the food." Dylan made changes from the 20. He didn't count it out. He shoved the coins across the counter with the back of his hand. 2 quarters and a penny rolled off the edge, hit the tile floor, and spun in small circles before going flat. Dylan looked down at the coins, then back up at Marcus. His mouth curled into a lazy smirk. "Oops." Sabrina pressed her hand over her mouth. A muffled laugh slipped through her fingers. Marcus bent down without a word. He picked up the coins one by one, slid them into his pocket. Then he walked to a booth near the kitchen pass-through window and sat down quietly. Under the table, he texted Rachel. "Fake surcharge on my order. $3.50. Not in our system. Keep recording." Rachel replied in 4 seconds. "Confirmed." Legal is watching the feed live. The diner hummed around him. Forks scraped against ceramic plates. Low conversations blended with the hiss of the grill through the kitchen window. Motown drifted from the jukebox Marvin Gaye. Something slow and aching. A song that sounded like it remembered better days. The smell of melting butter and crisping hash browns and fresh coffee swirled together in the warm air. Marcus folded his hands on the table, and he waited. 7 minutes later, the white couple who had ordered after him received their plates. Sabrina carried both out with care, set them down gently, and smiled wide. "Y'all enjoy now. Let me know if you need anything at all." Their eggs were golden and steaming. Toast thick cut, slick with butter, grits piled high with a glossy pat melting into the center. Marcus was still waiting. 5 more minutes. 12 total. Sabrina finally brought his plate. One hand carrying it, the other resting on her hip. She dropped it on the table with a thud that rattled the silverware. No words. She turned and walked away without looking back. Marcus looked down at his plate. The eggs were overcooked, dry, rubbery at the edges, browning like they had been sitting forgotten on a shelf. The toast was 2 heel-end slices, the hard ends nobody chooses, barely warmed through. The grits were a thin smear at the bottom of the bowl, not enough to fill a single spoon. 2 booths over, a man his age was eating the exact same platter. Fluffy eggs, golden and soft, thick buttered toast, a full steaming bowl of grits. Same menu, same kitchen, same cook, same price, completely different plate. Through the pass-through window, Patricia Owens's spatula stopped mid-flip. She had cooked that order herself. Eggs scrambled soft, bread sliced from the center of the loaf, grits filled to the brim. What sat on that table was not what she had made. She looked toward the front. Dylan was leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, watching Marcus with a lazy, knowing grin. Sabrina slid up beside him and whispered something. Dylan shook with a short, ugly laugh, the kind of sound a closed room makes when it thinks no one can hear it. Marcus picked up his fork, cut into the eggs, cold in the center. He chewed once, set the fork down, and pushed the plate forward. He didn't complain, didn't wave anyone over, just sat with his hands folded, cataloging every detail in silence. Then the front door chimed again. An elderly black woman stepped inside. She moved slowly, one hand steadying herself at the door frame. She wore a neatly pressed floral dress and a small hat pinned to the side, the kind women wear to Sunday church. A thin gold chain at her collarbone. Her purse hung from the crook of her arm with the careful dignity of a woman who has always taken care of what she owns. She walked to the counter with quiet, steady steps. Sabrina was wiping the register screen, eyes fixed downward. "Excuse me, dear," the woman said softly. "Could you tell me what the soup of the day is?" Sabrina kept wiping. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The woman stood perfectly still, waiting with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime waiting in rooms that weren't built for her. "Excuse me," she said again, just slightly louder. Sabrina finally looked up with a long, theatrical sigh, the kind designed to make another person feel like an interruption rather than a customer. "Ma'am, can you speak up? I cannot understand a single word you're saying." She had been speaking clearly. Everyone within 15 feet had heard her just fine. "I was just asking about the—" Dylan cut in from behind, without even turning around. "Maybe try the kids' menu. Simpler choices for simpler folks." Sabrina bit her lower lip. A small, ugly laugh escaped through her nose. The old woman's fingers tightened slowly on her purse strap. Her chin dipped toward her chest. Her lips pressed together, not in anger, but in the quiet, practiced way of someone who learned long ago that certain rooms were never truly meant for people like her. She turned and walked out. The bell above the door chimed softly behind her. That small sound hung in the air like a note that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Nobody called after her. Nobody moved. Marcus set his mug down. His jaw was tight. He pulled out his phone under the table. "Angela, tell me you saw that. Every second." She knew the layout by heart. Been coming here for years. "What do you want to do?" "Not yet. I need to see everything." Minutes later, Marcus walked toward the restrooms at the back of the diner. The narrow hallway was lined with framed photographs of Golden Griddle's early days. The first location, the first staff photo, the first newspaper review mounted behind glass. Frames he had chosen himself for every location across the Southeast. On his way back, the kitchen door was cracked open a few inches. Patricia Owens stood just inside, spatula in hand, apron dusted with flour. Her dark eyes locked onto him through the gap. She looked left. She looked right. "Don't eat the grits," she whispered. Marcus stopped. "I saw what he did." Her voice trembled, steady, but barely. "Right before your plate went out, I turned away from the window for just a second, but I saw his hands hovering over the bowl." She exhaled. "He put something in there." Cold crawled slowly down the back of Marcus's neck. "I've tried reporting them," Patricia went on, words spilling faster now, like water finally breaking through a crack it had been pressing against for years. "Twice. Wrote it all down. I gave it to the regional manager. Both times nothing. He's Dylan's uncle. The complaints just vanished." Her eyes were glassy, not crying, just that particular exhaustion that settles into a person who has been carrying something heavy and invisible for far too long. "I didn't know what else to do." Marcus looked at her steadily. His voice was quiet, certain, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be loud to be believed. "Thank you. I hear you, and I promise you that." She nodded once, fast, blinked hard, and stepped back behind the kitchen door. It swung shut with a soft creak. Marcus returned to his booth. The grits sat untouched at the far edge of the table, glistening dully under fluorescent light. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. Rachel, full legal standby. Call the health department. Pull every complaint filed at this location in the past 14 months. Every single one. Already ahead of you. The team is moving. Marcus set the phone face down on the table. He folded his hands. He was not just watching anymore. For the next 45 minutes, Marcus stayed in that booth. He ordered a second coffee just to have a reason to sit. And what he watched was not random. It was a system. A black father walked in with his young son, maybe 6 years old, holding his dad's hand, eyes wide at the jukebox. Dylan rang up their order without a greeting, without a smile, without once looking the man in the eye. The total came out $5 above the menu price. When the father asked about the difference, Dylan shrugged. Prices went up last week. They hadn't. Marcus had approved every price on that board himself. A Latina woman ordered a sweet tea to go. Sabrina filled the cup halfway, snapped the lid on, slid it across the counter without a word. The woman looked at the cup clearly half empty, said nothing, and walked out. 3 minutes later, a white teenager ordered the same sweet tea. Sabrina filled it to the brim, smiled, said, "There you go, sweetheart." Same drink, same cup, same Sabrina. A young black man came in college age, wearing a university hoodie, backpack on one shoulder. He stepped toward the counter to check the menu on his phone. Dylan straightened up immediately. He pointed at the backpack. "The bag stays at the front. Store policy." There was no such policy. Golden Griddle had never had a bag check policy at any of its 38 locations. Marcus had never written one. It did not exist. The young man hesitated, looked around the room, then reluctantly set his backpack by the front door. 15 seconds later, a white man in his 30s walked in with a large messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He walked straight to a booth and sat down. Dylan said nothing, didn't even glance at the bag. The young man saw it. He turned to Dylan. His voice was quiet but firm. "You didn't ask him about his bag." Dylan's easy expression vanished. He stepped out from behind the counter, closing the distance until they were barely 2 feet apart. "You got a problem." His voice dropped hard. "Because I can call the cops right now. They love dealing with guys like you." The young man's jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the floor. When his food came, he picked up his tray and his backpack and walked out the door without looking back. The bell barely made a sound. Marcus stood up. He walked to the counter. Every step is measured, calm, deliberate. He looked Dylan directly in the eyes. "Do you treat all your customers this way, or just the ones who look like me?" The diner went quiet. A fork stopped scraping somewhere behind him. The jukebox between songs left a gap of silence that felt enormous. Dylan blinked. His face hardened. He squared his shoulders and leaned across the counter. "What did you just say to me?" Sabrina picked up the store phone immediately, holding it like a prop, her finger hovering over the buttons. "Should I call someone?" Marcus didn't move. "I'd like to speak with your manager." Dylan let out a single sharp laugh. "I am the manager on shift. And my uncle's the regional manager, so good luck with that, pal." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right." He turned as if to walk back to his booth. Dylan called after him. "You don't like how we do things here? The door is right there. Nobody's keeping you." Marcus sat back down, and that should have been the end of it. But Dylan wasn't finished. He picked up the phone. His voice was casual, practiced, the voice of a man who had made this exact call before and knew precisely how to frame it. "Yeah, hi. I've got a customer in here being aggressive, refusing to leave, making threats to my staff. Can you send someone out?" Marcus had not raised his voice once. He had not moved toward anyone. He had not refused to leave. He had asked one question, but Dylan was building a story, and Sabrina was helping him build it. She stepped out from behind the register, voice going loud and theatrical, performing for the room. "Sir, we asked you to leave nicely. We don't want any trouble. Please, just calm down." Marcus was sitting in a booth with his hands folded on the table. 2 customers near the window pulled out their phones and started recording. An older man in a trucker cap shook his head slowly. A black woman with 2 small children quietly gathered their things and moved to a booth farther from the counter, pulling her kids close. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. 4 minutes later, a Decatur police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Officer Vivian Cross walked through the front door, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, close-cropped hair, one hand resting casually on her belt, eyes already reading the room before anyone had said a word. Dylan came around the counter immediately, gesturing toward Marcus's booth, voice urgent and righteous. "That guy, right there. He's been harassing my staff, refusing to leave, making threats. I called because I was genuinely scared for everyone's safety." Officer Cross looked at Marcus. Marcus hadn't moved. His hands were still folded on the table. His coffee sat half empty in front of him. "Sir," Cross said, walking over, "I'm going to need to see some ID." Marcus reached into his pocket slowly. He pulled out his driver's license and placed it flat on the table. Cross picked it up, read the name, looked at Marcus's face, looked at the license again. Then she turned and looked at Dylan standing behind her with his arms crossed and his chin raised high. "Officer," Marcus said calmly, "I asked one question about the service here. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't threatened anyone. I haven't refused to leave." Cross looked around the room. The two customers with phones were still recording. The older man in the trucker cap caught her eye and shook his head slowly. A small, clear signal that said everything without a single word. Nobody in that diner backed Dylan's story. Not one person. Cross turned to Dylan. Her tone shifted, still professional, but noticeably cooler. "I don't see a disturbance here." Dylan's confident expression cracked. Just slightly. A flicker behind his eyes, like a man who had rehearsed a script and suddenly realized the room was playing a different scene. But it was already too late for scripts, because through the front window, a black SUV had just pulled into the parking lot, and the woman stepping out of it was about to change everything. The front door opened, and the bell chimed one more time. Rachel Hammond stepped inside. Navy blue blazer, pressed white blouse, black heels that clicked sharp and deliberate against the checkered tile with every step. She carried a tablet in one hand and a leather folder in the other. Behind her, two broad-shouldered men followed in black polo shirts with the Golden Griddle logo stitched small and gold on the chest. Corporate security. Every conversation in the diner dropped to a murmur. Even the jukebox seemed to pause, as if the room itself understood that something was about to shift permanently. Dylan stepped forward, chest puffed, still riding the adrenaline of the performance he had been building all morning. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of a situation. You're going to have to wait." Rachel didn't look at him. She didn't slow down. She walked past the counter, past Officer Cross, and stopped directly in front of Marcus's booth. "Mr. Allen," she said, clear, loud enough for the entire room. "We have everything on the feed. Legal has reviewed the full footage. We're ready whenever you are." Dylan's mouth opened. Slightly, his eyes jumped from Rachel to Marcus and back again. "Mr. Allen." Rachel turned to face Dylan and Sabrina, who stood frozen behind the register with the store phone still in her hand. "My name is Rachel Hammond. I am the Chief Operations Officer of Golden Griddle Incorporated." The words landed in the room like a hammer on glass. Dylan took a half step backward. His hand dropped from his hip. Sabrina set the phone down slowly, as if it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. Marcus stood up from the booth. He didn't rush. He reached up to the collar of his hoodie and unzipped it halfway, revealing the tiny body camera clipped inside the pocket. The lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, had been recording every single second since he walked through that door. He looked at Dylan, then at Sabrina. Then he spoke. "My name is Marcus Allen. I am the founder, owner, and CEO of Golden Griddle. Every location, every menu, every paycheck." He paused and let the silence do its work. "Including yours." Absolute silence. No forks, no grill, no music. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of Dylan's breathing growing heavier by the second. Dylan's face went from red to white in under 5 seconds. His lips moved. Nothing came out. Then, finally, a broken stammer. "Wait, you. That's not. I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Marcus's voice was still calm, still even, but there was iron underneath it now. "You didn't know the man you insulted, overcharged, and called the police on built this place from a single frying pan and a $500 loan? You didn't know the man whose food you tampered with signs your paycheck every 2 weeks?" Dylan had no answer. His mouth hung open like a door with a broken hinge. Sabrina's hands were shaking against the counter. She pressed them flat to stop the trembling. It didn't work. Rachel stepped forward and turned the tablet around so the screen faced the room. Split-screen footage. The left side, Marcus's body camera, every insult, every smirk, every fake surcharge punched into the register captured in crisp, undeniable detail. The right side, the diner's own security cameras. Angels Dylan and Sabrina had apparently forgotten existed. Dylan pocketing cash after voiding surcharges. Sabrina adjusting register totals to make the drawer balance. Dylan's hands hovering over Marcus's grits before the plate went out. Eleanor Wright, the elderly woman in the floral dress, mocked and turned away without ever learning the soup of the day. The college student was forced to surrender his backpack while another customer walked in unchecked. 4 months of footage, exposed in 4 minutes. Officer Cross watched the screen without moving. Her jaw tightened. When the food tampering clip played, her hand moved instinctively to the notepad on her belt. She turned to Dylan with a very different expression than the one she had walked in with. Dylan tried one last move. His voice cracked desperate, reaching for the only lifeline he had ever known. "My uncle James Thornton. He's the regional manager. Just call him. He'll sort this out." Rachel cut him off cleanly. "James Thornton was placed on administrative leave 45 minutes ago. Our legal team is already in direct contact with him regarding suppressed employee complaints and falsified performance reviews." She let that settle for a long moment. "There is no one left to call, Dylan." Dylan's knees buckled slightly. He caught himself on the edge of the counter with one hand. Sabrina let out a short, choked sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Officer Cross looked at Rachel. "I'm going to need a copy of that footage. The food tampering specifically. That's a potential felony under Georgia state law." Rachel nodded. "Already prepared. Your department will have it within the hour." Dylan broke first. His whole body deflated, shoulders dropping, chin falling, hands sliding off the counter. He stepped toward Marcus, palms up, voice cracking into something meant to sound like remorse. "Mr. Allen, look, I was just having a bad day. I swear I didn't mean any of it. It was a joke. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." Marcus looked at him the way you look at someone who just insulted your intelligence and expected you to thank them for it. "A bad day," Marcus repeated quietly. "We have footage going back 4 months, Dylan. 4 months of fake surcharges, 4 months of stolen cash, 4 months of customers being humiliated because of the color of their skin. 4 months of Patricia Owens filing complaints that your uncle threw in a drawer." He let each sentence land like a stone dropped into still water. No shouting, no performance. Just the weight of truth said plainly. "That's not a bad day. That's who you are when you think nobody's watching." Dylan's mouth opened, then closed. Then it opened again. Not a word came through. Then Sabrina tried. She stepped from behind the register, tears streaming, hands clasped in front of her chest. Her voice came out high and trembling. "I didn't want any of this. Dylan told me what to do, and I was scared of losing my job. I just went along with it. I never wanted to hurt anyone." Rachel opened the leather folder. She pulled out 3 printed screenshots time-stamped, highlighted in yellow, and laid them on the counter one by one. "This is you laughing while an elderly woman walked out of this diner in tears." First screenshot. "This is you voiding a fraudulent transaction while Dylan counted cash behind you." Second. "And this is you whispering instructions about which customers to target." Third. Rachel looked her in the eyes. "You weren't a bystander, Sabrina. You were a partner." Sabrina grabbed the counter and sobbed loud, deep, shaking. Nobody moved to comfort her. Marcus straightened his back. "Dylan Pierce and Sabrina Cole, you are both terminated immediately from Golden Griddle Incorporated. Gross misconduct, theft, discriminatory conduct, and health code violations. Final paychecks will be mailed. You are not to return to this or any Golden Griddle location." Officer Cross stepped forward. "I'll need both of you to remain available for follow-up questioning. The food tampering footage alone is a potential felony." Dylan didn't fight. He walked toward the door with his head down, flanked by 2 corporate security officers, his footsteps slow and heavy on the checkered tile, the same tile he had stood on all morning like he owned the place. Sabrina followed, still crying, clutching her purse. The door swung shut. The bell chimed, the same cheerful sound it always made, but this time it sounded like a period at the end of a very long sentence. A few customers began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, rolling through the room like a wave. The older man in the trucker cap nodded once toward Marcus. The black woman who had moved her children to the far booth wiped her eyes quietly. Then Marcus turned toward the kitchen, Patricia Owens stood behind the pass-through window. She hadn't moved, spatula still in hand, apron still dusted with flour, but her face had changed. She looked like someone watching a door that had been locked for years finally swing open, afraid to believe it was real. Marcus walked to the kitchen entrance and spoke gently. "Patricia, you tried to do the right thing. Twice. You filed complaints that should have been heard, and the system here failed you. That ends today." She blinked. Her lips trembled. "I'd like to promote you to shift supervisor of this location, effective immediately. Every complaint you filed is now part of a formal corporate investigation." He paused. "Your voice matters." It always did. Patricia's spatula slipped from her hand and clattered against the steel counter. She pressed both palms over her mouth. Then the tears came. Not the desperate, panicked tears Sabrina had cried moments ago, but the quiet, deep, shaking kind that only comes when something you had quietly stopped believing in finally happens. She had worked in this diner for 6 years. 6 years of cooking good food, keeping her head down, hoping someone would eventually listen. Someone finally had. The story didn't end when Dylan and Sabrina walked out that door. In many ways, it was just beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, Golden Griddle's internal legal team brought in an independent auditor and tore the Decatur location apart. Every receipt, every register log, every voided transaction, every security backup goes back over a year. What they found was worse than even Marcus had anticipated. Dylan's surcharge scheme had been running for 14 months, not weeks, not a few bad shifts. 14 consecutive months of fake fees, inflated totals, and pocketed cash. The total amount stolen came to $58,000. Sabrina had been directly involved in at least $22,000 of that voiding transactions after customers left, adjusting register totals, making sure the numbers looked clean at the end of every shift. But the rot went deeper. Then 2 cashiers. James Thornton Dillon's uncle, the regional manager responsible for overseeing this location, and 11 others across the greater Atlanta area, had received 3 formal written complaints from staff members about Dylan and Sabrina's conduct. 3 complaints, submitted through proper channels, with dates, details, and signatures. All 3 had been buried in a locked drawer that nobody ever opened. Patricia Owens's 2 complaints were among them. Handwritten, detailed, and completely ignored. James had also falsified Dylan's performance reviews for over a year. On paper, Dylan was a model employee, punctual, professional, customer-focused, highly recommended for promotion. The reviews read like fiction, because that's exactly what they were. When confronted by Golden Griddle's attorneys, James Thornton's only response was, "He's family. I was trying to give him a chance to grow." A chance to grow. 14 months of theft and discrimination, and he called it a chance to grow. The Decatur Police Department moved quickly once Rachel delivered the full footage package. Within 72 hours, detectives had reviewed every minute of body camera and security footage and cross-referenced it with the auditor's financial records. The charges came down hard. Dylan Pierce was charged with theft by taking felony food tampering under Georgia state law, filing a false police report, and civil rights violations related to discriminatory service practices. His bail was set at $35,000. He couldn't make it. Sabrina Cole was charged with accessory to theft and conspiracy to commit fraud. She was released on her own recognizance, ordered not to leave the county. James Thornton was charged with obstruction, falsifying business records, and conspiracy to commit fraud. He surrendered himself at the Decatur precinct on a Tuesday morning, wearing a pressed suit and a blank expression that said he still hadn't fully understood how his nephew's behavior had become his own criminal case. Meanwhile, the story had already escaped the walls of the diner. One of the customers who had been recording during the confrontation the moment Dylan called the police, the moment Rachel walked in, the moment Marcus revealed who he was, posted the video to social media that same Saturday afternoon. By Sunday night, it had 4 million views. By Monday morning, a local Atlanta news station picked it up. The headline ran across the bottom of the screen. Golden Griddle CEO goes undercover, catches employees stealing and discriminating on camera. By Tuesday, it had gone national. CNN ran a 3-minute segment. NBC covered it during their morning broadcast. The clip of Marcus reveals the quiet, steady voice of a man in a gray hoodie saying, "I'm the founder, owner, and CEO of Golden Griddle. Including yours became its own cultural moment, looped and shared and replayed until the words felt like something people had been waiting to hear." Marcus held a press conference 2 days later at Golden Griddle corporate headquarters in Atlanta. He announced 3 immediate changes across all 38 locations. First, mandatory anti-discrimination training for every employee, from cashier to regional manager, to be completed within 60 days. Second, a confidential employee complaint hotline reporting directly to the corporate office, bypassing regional managers entirely so that no complaint could ever be buried in a drawer again. Third, the creation of a customer advocacy fund seeded with $500,000 of Marcus's personal money to support customers who had experienced discrimination at any food service establishment in the Southeast. Then he said something that made the entire room go still. There was a woman who came into my diner that morning, an elderly woman in a floral dress and a church hat. She walked up to the counter and asked about the soup of the day, and 2 of my employees laughed at her until she turned around and walked out the door. He paused. The room was completely silent. Her name is Eleanor Wright. She has been a Golden Griddle customer for 4 years. We found her through our loyalty program. His voice softened. I called her personally last night. He looked up. She will receive a lifetime dining pass to any Golden Griddle location in the country, and she received a personal apology not from my PR department, from me. 3 months later, the cases went to trial. Dylan Pierce was convicted on all counts. The felony food tampering charge carried the most weight. Prosecutors presented the body camera footage alongside lab results from the grits sample that Marcus had carefully preserved and handed over to police that same afternoon. The judge called Dylan's conduct a calculated pattern of cruelty disguised as casual indifference. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution of $58,000. Sabrina Cole accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to accessory charges and received 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service at a local food bank, and a permanent mark on her criminal record that would follow her into every job interview for the rest of her career. James Thornton was convicted of obstruction and falsifying business records. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison and permanently barred from holding any managerial position in the food service industry in the state of Georgia. Golden Griddle's legal team also filed a civil suit against all 3 for damages to the company's brand, lost revenue, and reputational harm. The case settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Separately, 12 affected customers identified through register logs, security footage, and loyalty program records joined a formal civil rights complaint with the Georgia Commission on Equal Opportunity. The case was later cited in a statewide training module distributed to over 3,000 food service establishments across the state. The system that had protected Dylan, enabled Sabrina, and silenced Patricia Owens had been dismantled completely, publicly, permanently. And it all started with a man in a hoodie ordering scrambled eggs. 6 months later, the Golden Griddle indicator looked like a different place. Not the walls, not the checkered floors, not the red vinyl booths, or the jukebox in the corner still spinning Motown on a lazy Saturday loop. Those were the same. Marcus had designed them to last. What changed was the feeling. Patricia Owens stood behind the counter now, not hiding behind the pass-through window, not whispering warnings through cracked kitchen doors. She was the shift supervisor. Her name tag said it. Her posture said it louder. She greeted every single customer who walked through that door, and she meant it. Every single time. The staff around her were new, diverse, and properly trained. They smiled because they wanted to, not because someone was watching. The kitchen smelled like fresh biscuits and real butter. The coffee was always hot. And every Saturday morning at 9:15, an elderly woman in a floral dress and a small church hat walked through the front door. Eleanor Wright. She didn't hesitate at the entrance anymore. She didn't brace herself for what might be waiting on the other side of the counter. She walked in like she belonged there, because she did. "Morning, Miss Eleanor," Patricia would say, the kind of smile that starts deep and rises slowly. "Yours?" "Yes, baby. The soup, and some of that cornbread if you have it." "Always got it for you." Eleanor would sit in the booth by the window, the same one she used to sit in before 2 cashiers made her feel like she wasn't welcome in her own neighborhood diner. Now she sat there with her soup and her cornbread and a lifetime dining pass she kept tucked in the front pocket of her purse, not like a voucher, but like a badge. like proof of something she had earned just by refusing to disappear. One Saturday in the late spring, the front door opened and a man walked in. Not in a hoodie this time. Navy suit, polished shoes, a watch on his wrist that caught the morning light. Patricia looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes went wide. Then she smiled, the kind that doesn't arrive all at once. Marcus Allen walked across the checkered floor of his diner. Patricia came around the counter, and without a word she pulled him into a hug. He hugged her back. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. They didn't need to. He stood outside afterward, looking up at the golden griddle sign, the same sign he had painted himself nearly 20 years ago, when this whole thing was nothing but a dream, held together by a frying pan and a $500 loan. He thought about the 14-year-old version of himself, a kid washing dishes in a diner that looked a lot like this one, in a town that wasn't so different from Decatur, a diner where some days the owner wouldn't even let him eat the leftover food at the end of a shift. He built Golden Griddle because he wanted every person, regardless of what they looked like, where they came from, or what they were wearing, to walk through the door and feel like they mattered. What Dylan and Sabrina did was a betrayal of that mission. What James Thornton did was a betrayal of trust. But what Patricia did, refusing to stay silent even when the system swallowed her complaints, even when nobody seemed to be listening, was the reason the mission survived. Here's what I want you to remember. The people who abuse small amounts of power are always the ones most terrified when real authority walks through the door. The people who stay silent when they see wrong, eventually, they become part of the wrong. But the people who speak up even when it costs them, even when it's exhausting, even when the complaints disappear into a locked drawer, are the people who change everything. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever watched someone be treated differently at a restaurant, a store, a workplace? And what did you do about it? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hits you, you already know what to do. Smash that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed, yet come on, you already know. I'll see you in the next one. Who you are when nobody's watching, that's the only version of you that matters. Not the smile you put on for your boss, not the handshake you give to important people. The real you is the one that shows up at 9 a.m. on a random Tuesday when you think no one is looking and no one cares. Here's what most people don't realize. Someone is always watching. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the truth doesn't expire. Every shortcut, every lie, every person you mistreated because you thought you could get away with it. It finds its way back, not because the universe is magical, but because people remember. And one day, the wrong person remembers at exactly the right time. So do yourself a favor. Be the same person in every room. Treat the man in the hoodie the same way you treat the man in the suit. Not because you don't know who's standing in front of you, but because it's the right thing to do, whether anyone is watching or not. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Real stories, real justice, every week. And remember, the cameras don't have to be rolling for the truth to find you. It always does.